Very much appreciate that. But let's turn it right over and get the day started. So I want to go to our plenary session, and no better moderator that I could think of than Nick Schacht. He is the Chief Global Development Officer for the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM. Nick, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Randy. And Brian, thanks for those opening remarks. Thrilled to be here kicking off the last day of this conference and really focusing on a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts. We know, we hear the statistics all the time that there are anywhere between 500,000 and 1 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the United States, with a shortfall worldwide that's projected to grow to close to 2.5 million in the coming years. And at the same time, we are challenged with the fact that if we look at our traditional education systems, in the United States, we turn out about 65,000 people a year with bachelor's degrees in computer science, which is just a trickle into what's really needed in terms of a waterfall. And so organizations are having to change the way they approach talent management, talent development, and talent acquisition, particularly in the context of cybersecurity. And we've got a couple of people with us today joining me on the panel that I'm really excited about, who bring different perspectives and a lot of history and a lot of experience with them to this challenge, tackling the challenge of talent development in cybersecurity in new and innovative ways. From the government side, we have Travis Hoadley, who is Director of Innovation for the Cybersecurity Talent Management System in the Department of Homeland Security. And Travis has been working in DHS for about a decade, and before that brings broad experience from the private sector, working in management consulting and talent development. We're also privileged to have joining us Deji Mabogunje, who is the Director of Talent Acquisition for Akamai Technologies on the private sector side. Deji also has been at Akamai for about a decade, changing the way that his organization approaches talent in the cybersecurity skills shortfall. So with that, I'd like to invite Deji and Travis to join by video, and maybe begin by talking about how you approach the challenges, how you see the challenges, and how you approach the challenges in your organizations. Travis, perhaps we can begin with you. In DHS, you're taking a decidedly non-traditional approach to government talent management. Tell us about some of the things that you're doing and the challenges that you're encountering.
Sure. So the effort I work on at DHS is creating an entirely new federal personnel system called the Cybersecurity Talent Management System, which really reflects an approach to modernize civil service employment for both the field of cybersecurity as well as the DHS cybersecurity mission. So we are sort of building civil service employment from the ground up, rethinking the way that we think about federal jobs, the way that we think about how we conduct the hiring process, compensate employees, and then also think about their development over time, acknowledging that many of the traditional civil service structures that we use across federal agencies today were designed for mostly clerical, more predictable work than we have in the field of cybersecurity, and that refreshing them for a more skills-based, competency-based focus will help us to meet our mission needs into the future.
No, that's terrific. And I mean, completely innovative and different from the perspective of traditional government employment. Deji, at Akamai, how much of that resonates with you, and what are you doing at Akamai?
Thank you for the time. I appreciate it. So I think we, at Akamai Technologies, and for those who aren't familiar, we are responsible for content delivery and also have a huge security practice here, making sure bad actors on the web and securing data and transitions. We are essentially building a lot of our own programs internally. As you mentioned earlier, there is a significant shortfall of talent that fit the needs in the security space. So we have approached this from a perspective of talent spotting, building internal programs that allow us to identify individuals, either internally or externally, and put them through rotation programs or put them through a session that's built for us to allow us to teach and understand how they can continue to grow and learn. So I think for us, it's in a place where we are building our own. We're essentially converting folks who have an interest in technology and building that security component.
I want to explore some of that in more detail, but I'd also like to introduce the last member of our panel, Dr. Peter Capelli, who is the George W. Taylor Professor of Management and the Director of the Center for Human Resources at the Wharton School. Peter's list of experience and focus in the area of modernizing the approach to talent development spans countries, continents, academia, and commercial institutions. And Peter, maybe we could begin with you telling us a little bit about your perspective on the traditional methods of talent acquisition and development versus what's needed in today's environment when things change so much more quickly.
Okay. Sure, Nick. And maybe first, just a little apology. I've got a disc problem in my back, which means it's very difficult for me to sit. So I'm going to try to stand up here a little bit, and I hope I don't lose you in the pitch up here at the top.
You framed it perfectly.
Good, that's perfect. Yeah. Excuse me. Well, let me say just a little bit about the general context of first some things that are going on right now. You may have seen in the news this morning that General Electric has dropped its audit program. So General Electric was famous for developing talent, and they had this quite famous program in its finance department for a 5-year program to develop people in the audit field, and they may have had it for generations, and they are giving it up. And the question is, kind of why are they doing that? And I think it's the same problem that we're seeing across industry, frankly, in the US, and that is, most employers find now that they are looking for skills they can't find, but everybody wants work-based experience already. They're not looking typically for people that they can train. They're looking for people who already have those skills. And I think there's kind of a misunderstanding among the general public when employers say they can't find what they're looking for. I think there's often a view that they're looking for people that they can train, and frankly, that's not true. Training has been dropping sharply in the periods for which we've got the data. So we all want to hire, frankly, from each other. And so the problem is, what do we do about that? Now, I know you've got a session where you've had one already on apprenticeship programs, and your colleagues asked me to say just a little bit about that, because apprenticeship programs sound like a perfect way to develop talent. Here's the difference between apprenticeship programs and what we typically have been doing historically. So historically, we hire people, we train them, we develop them, we put them to use for us. And then what started to happen about 30, 40 years ago is people would then hire them away from us because they're already trained. Everybody wants people who've already got the skills, especially if we've trained them well, so they hire them away from us. So then we basically either have to raise the pay for these folks up, or we lose them, and in the process, we end up paying for training twice. So we end up, in the first case, hiring people, training, paying for the training, and then paying again to keep them, paying the market price so that they don't leave. The apprenticeship idea is different. So the apprenticeship idea is that people pay as they go, so that as they are learning, they are basically contributing. So it's work-based learning, and we're not paying them very much upfront. And eventually they're going to become more valuable. So the problem is, if you look around the US, why don't we have apprenticeship programs? We have them in most other countries in the world. Why don't we have them here? And the answer, frankly, comes down to the employer community. So in countries like Germany, they get all the big employers together. There's a collective agreement that says, here's what we're all going to do. In countries like the Scandinavian countries, they have laws that say, here's what we're all going to do. We're going to hire these people. We're going to put them in apprenticeship programs. They're going to look like this. And we promise not to hire them away from each other until the apprenticeship programs are done. The problem we've got in the US is we don't have those agreements among employers. We don't have those laws. And we have jurisdictions, training's a sort of state function, that are right next to each other. So at the state level, we could train people in Pennsylvania. We're going to lose them to New Jersey. We're going to lose them to Delaware, right? So we have quite a tricky problem here. But let me tell you, I don't think the answer is going to be to hire people, to get better at hiring from your competitors. I don't think that's going to work, particularly in this field that you folks are all in, because nobody's producing the talent that you need. So let me give you my quick answer to this whole thing. And this is all I really want to say about this whole topic, which begins with a conversation I had with the Pentagon folks a long time ago. And they were complaining about their pilots, that they had these great cargo pilots, but they were well trained. They spent a lot of money training them. But after 20 years, they all left to go work for the airlines. And they said, boy, this is terrible. We need to raise bonus money and other things to keep these folks so they don't leave to go work for the airlines. And I thought about this and I said, well, you know, the whole reason they came to work for you in the first place and to be cargo pilots is so they could leave in 20 years and cash in and make the big money. And if you look at places where this works now, you look, for example, at the Security Exchange Commission, they actually hire really good people and they don't pay them very well and they lose them in 5 to 10 years. The reason they get them in the first place is because they know that they're going to be able to leave in 10 years and make a lot of money someplace else. So I think what we have to do is to work with that. Basically say, we've got programs here that will train you to be a professional in these areas. We understand at some point you are going to leave us, but here's the deal. There's going to be a 3-year apprenticeship program. After that, maybe you owe us 3 years, or you've got to pay back the deal that we offered you in the first place, which is very common in business now. And after that, we hope you'll stay. But if you leave, we've essentially paid for the training along the way. We're not front loading it and then losing the investment to our competitors in industry who want the same people at that point. So I think that's the answer. Frankly, I don't see another way for us to get around the problem.
Well, and I would agree completely, Peter, that in a world where where we have a skill shortage, where there aren't enough cybersecurity professionals to fill the available jobs, if nobody's doing any training, then we don't address that bigger issue. Now, Deji, when we spoke before, you talked about some of the things you're doing at Akamai in terms of not only trying to breed an internal cohort, but also to build a sense of future at Akamai for the people on your team. And this, I think, is relevant to what Peter was just talking about. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing in this regard, both to build and then try to retain the talent that you're building.
Perfect. Yeah, one of the biggest things we learned was that just as was mentioned, folks would tend to do the work for a while and then take off, leave the company. And so in terms of trying to reinvigorate and re-energize folks to want to stay, there's a big focus on the internal career development. So we launched what we're calling the Akamai People Experience, Apex. And part of that is really looking at the core employees that we have, understanding gaps and needs. We understood also from some of our research internally that it became easier for folks to find jobs outside the company than inside. So using technology-based solutions, we decided to revamp and make it a little easier for folks to navigate the company, understand where the interests lie, and how to get access and networking internally to understand who's doing what so they can augment their skills. So that was the first thing in trying to retain some of the talent and make attractive oppositions for folks to continue to grow and develop. So we have our internal career development program, which has been going on for a few years. Part of that as well, we also launched a career fair, which was new for us. This is the second year that we've done this. So part of that Apex Akamai People Experience, we did a career fair to just open things up and sort of move and shift some of the culture and mentality around from the management's perspective. You know, this is Akamai talent. So folks should be able to transfer and move around and learn things in order to keep them interested. So that's been successful in broadening up and changing some of the culture and allowing people to explore. Secondarily, the other element was what we call the Akamai Technical Academy. And that's sort of what I alluded to a little bit earlier before, where we're trying to attract folks in. I think as we utilize this program, it gives us a sense of also building that bench, bringing in employees who are learning the technology, learning the space, coming in at a different entry point. Whereas where you have a lot of senior employees, they may be prone to leaving on to the next adventure. So this program will take people on for a period of 6 to 8 months, allow them to train while on the job. And then post that, find positions internally within the company to allow them to apply those skills. And the training is practical examples of what we're dealing with in the workforce. So real life training that has been useful in helping. And we've expanded this beyond the US to different sites in the company, but it's been a very useful tool in helping grow that next level and the next wave.
Yeah, and this is a kind of a universal challenge. And Travis, as I'm thinking about what both Deji and Peter are saying, you know, in DHS, with regard to cybersecurity talent, you're sort of like the center of gravity for the U.S. government, certainly, in terms of the development of that talent. And very much a similar situation to what Peter described with regard to the Department of Defense and pilots. So how do you see the government's role, DHS's role, in building talent, both with regard to trying to build a talent workforce, a cybersecurity workforce in DHS, but then also pollinating that talent out to other government organizations and to industry?
Sure. So to add on to what I said in my introduction, so the cybersecurity talent management system that I've been working on developing is scheduled to launch around the summer of 2021. So we haven't necessarily launched yet, but we're in the process of finalizing plans, including because we're from the federal sector, completing required rulemaking that allows us to use these flexibilities. That being said, when we think about the cyber talent problem and some of the issues that people have just raised recently, one of the fundamental things that we're looking at changing or attempting to modernize is a perspective that a federal civil career is always sort of a 30-year trajectory in a particular occupation. And so we have a model of talent management today that's built around assuming that people will come into the government, spend 30 years working, maybe gaining new skills, move up a career ladder, and then retire at the end of that. What we know from our cyber workforce especially is that people are already breaking out of that model. And what that means in many cases is that they're working for the government for a few years. They're performing some of the work that frankly at DHS is specialized. It reflects some training in particular areas of our mission that maybe aren't even available at private sector employers. And then they're going into the private sector for other career opportunities. So what we're trying to do is create alternative ways of thinking about what is a cybersecurity career, and can it include periods of time in the federal agency, in multiple federal agencies, in the private sector, really reducing the barriers to movement between those different organizations. Today, when individuals leave federal service and attempt to come back later after time in the private sector, there's often a lot of barriers in terms of them being hired quickly. Also, we have a struggle sometimes reflecting changes in their skills in terms of our compensation that we can provide. So those are all things that we're trying to address with our new cyber talent management system. I think connected to the notion that we're not going to hire away this problem as well, we're looking very carefully at the extent to which we can hire folks who are just starting their career, maybe show potential for success in the field of cybersecurity, and can be developed through mostly on-the-job training to perform cybersecurity roles at DHS, acknowledging that we're hoping they can have a multi-year career, even if not 30 years at the department, and then potentially serve other employers after that.
So you're doing what Peter advises, which is, okay, accept the reality of the situation and play with it and work with that, play the hand that we're dealt in this environment where people don't look to organizations for multi-decade careers necessarily. Travis, let's stay with you for a minute, because relating to what you're saying about developing the talent, when we were speaking before, you mentioned that there are 3 groupings of competencies that you look to develop in your workforce to get to a demonstrated level of proficiency. You mentioned professional competencies, technical competencies, and leadership competencies. And you had some really interesting comments about which of those you felt were most critical and most important. And maybe we could go back to that and get you to explore that a little bit for us.
Sure. So when we think about having sort of a competency-focused approach to talent management, really from the beginning of the talent management process, when you're defining a job and the skills that you need to perform the work of your organization, all the way through hiring processes, compensation, and development of individuals, we focus on 3 core sets of competencies, as you mentioned. So the professional is really what folks tend to refer to as soft skills. This is things like critical analysis, the ability to collaborate, work in a group, communicate information effectively in writing, as well as in meetings, et cetera. And what we find with our cybersecurity subject matter experts at the department is they often emphasize this group of skills as the most critical to success in many of our roles. That there are aspects of the other group of competencies, technical cybersecurity competencies, that those can be sort of taught on the job. They can be learned through specific specialized training, but that you need to come to the table with some of those professional competencies that I mentioned and the ability for those skills to be honed over time. We also look at leadership competencies for those folks that are in organizational and people leadership roles, acknowledging that that's sort of a different type of skill set that we need to focus on, and that jobs that require that type of expertise, that we really should be screening and thinking about that maybe more than we have historically thought about in government.
And so from that, I mean, you use the term professional competencies or soft skills. I tend to refer to those as power skills simply because people tend to denigrate soft skills, but they really are the power behind everything. Peter, you've done scads of research in this area. And so as you think about these groupings of competencies from technical to leadership to professional competencies or power skills, Travis is saying, look, we need to look with people who have the core capabilities in these professional competencies, because that makes everything else work. What have you found in your research, and what do you see being effective? And you're on mute.
It's probably just as well because I didn't have anything to say there for a minute. I think it's quite surprising what we don't know about this. What we'd like to know is, can we predict with some accuracy how people will do in tasks that they haven't done yet? And we're not that great at it, but we could be better at doing that. So for example, things like assessing soft skills, can you put people into situations that are similar to what they will have to do in your organization as a way to assess that? When you look back on their prior experiences, can we find those situations that looked similar and see how they did in those? I think we can be reasonably certain that some skills, the technical skills, are easier to learn than some of the behavioral skills, which tend to be more dispositional. So, you know, maybe the question is not completely what is more important, but what is easier and more able to teach, and what is more available in the broader population, right? You know, we can do much better at training these things than we probably think we can. I always think about the Indian IT companies, which seem to be able to take liberal arts graduates and in the space of about 9 weeks, turn them into IT consultants on their campuses, like the Infosys campus in Mysore. You know, they just figure out how to train these people as if it's a college experience and do it. So I think we could train a whole lot more than we think. I don't think we are quite as constrained in terms of applicants as we think we are. But I think that the problem is if we start thinking, okay, we're not going to train, we can't do that, then it's extremely difficult to make this thing work, right?
And so, Deji, Peter talks about training for things that they can't do yet, or that we don't even know that we're going to ask them to do. Certainly in the world of cybersecurity, we know that the world a year from now is going to look different than it does today. How do you approach that when you're building your workforce? What do you focus on developing in these cohorts of people that you bring into the cybersecurity workforce?
Agreed. I would echo what's been said here, where we've launched some behavioral interview training looking for competencies as well. And really along the same lines, the prior behavior will help define what future acts might look like. And there are a whole host of technical things that can be taught and learned on the role. So with all the various positions that we interview for, we broke things down, and we use the Lominger guides and the Lominger International process to help with identifying the characteristics and the competencies that work for us and what we're looking for. And a lot of what Travis said resonate with what we look for in our area, but around, driving for results, being action oriented, right? Looking at problem solving and things of that nature. And so it became something that was applicable in a whole variety of roles, from the core, hardcore technical ones, even through to sales and softer skills, where we have, functional analyst type positions. But it proved to be something that, if done right, it helps in that spotting that I mentioned earlier, and being able to say, or at least make some extrapolations around what's been done in the past. And this is an assumption of on how somebody might react in a similar situation in our environment. So bringing that sort of mindset and actually retraining some of our folks who hire to go through interview architects and guides and learn the process, because it takes a keen eye to be able to uncover and delve into some of these things. And the technical stuff will come. You'll get on the job training and understanding of how to do the things that apply in our environment, but this sort of mindset around what, how will they behave in the future, and relying on the competencies was something that was huge for us.
And one of the other things that, Deji, that you said that you've been working with at Akamai is over the last year or so is taking out systemic bias from your talent acquisition and talent management system. And certainly when we're in a field where we've got a significant skills shortage, any labor pools, any talent pools that we're not leveraging it's wasteful. So can you talk a little bit about your efforts to reduce or eliminate systemic bias and what kind of results you've seen from that?
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, this is something that's been near and dear to our hearts over the last few years, and just trying to make sure we have an inclusive environment, one that allows us to explore and reach a whole host of different folks that we might not ordinarily look at. And then also taking a look at ourselves internally, how we go about with our evaluation processes in identifying talent and bringing them on board. So one of the big things that we did was around, we partnered with a technology company to help us with how we write our job descriptions, and really looking in flagging words that may be coded or may discourage folks from applying to the positions that we have within the company. And we're doing this across the company globally, to really hone in and put the things that are most important and that will attract people to Akamai, so that we can honestly get a good swath across the spectrum of potential candidates. In addition to that, as we do our interviewing and try to hire folks, we are utilizing diverse interview panels to screen and identify all the candidates that come through. So somebody coming into an interview at Akamai will meet with a variety of people from different backgrounds and cultures and technical aptitude, and just diverse thoughts to help with minimizing that bias. And it's been effective in seeing our applicant pool rise. We've seen a few more folks that we may not necessarily have seen come to Akamai and look at us and think about an opportunity with us. And also with the interview panels that we've diversified, it also gives a different glimpse. If you're coming to the company and taking a look and you don't have the background, or you come from a varied culture or something along those lines, you get a glimpse of what we have within the company. You get a sense of the variety that the company brings as well too. And that sort of helps with in the selection process to check and balance against some of the perceived biases that we all naturally may have.
I want to go to Travis and then Peter on this subject of bias, but let me remind the audience there is a Q&A pod. If you have questions for our panel, please put them in there. We're starting to get some questions and we'll address those in a moment. Travis, let me turn to you and the issue of bias or systemic bias in the federal employment environment, the federal talent management environment. Is that an issue that you've also found yourself dealing with?
Yeah, so I think what we're really focused on is we know that there's more that we can do with diversity and inclusion, especially in the cybersecurity space where we're maybe behind some of the other fields and occupations in the federal government when it comes to the current workforce that we have. So piggybacking on what Deji said, we're focused on problematic language throughout our human capital processes. So from our job announcements all the way through particular assessment questions that we might ask folks as part of the hiring process as well. And I think what we're really focused on is partnering with experts in this space. So we work closely with industrial and organizational psychologists to really assess all of the products that we're building, especially anything that's related to a test that we might use to make an employment decision, to make sure that we're not having adverse impact, that we're actually testing the competencies that we want to focus on, and that we're able to make sure that we have a high quality hire at the end of the day, and that we have a diverse workforce that we were trying to build.
And Peter, how are you seeing on a broader scale this perspective on inclusion and diversity playing out in a very highly technical field like cybersecurity?
Well, let me back up if I could just for a second and get to this, back to this question of skill shortage and how this fits together. I think it's a great myth that there's a skill shortage. I think there's all kinds of people who have the capability to do this kind of work if we're willing to look for them and look at them. And the problem is we just don't spend very much time looking. We go to the usual places that have the degree programs that we know already. We don't look at other schools that might have similar programs. We just haven't spent much time there. You know, we don't get enough minority applicants, but we don't go target the historically Black schools, for example, and go, you don't have to go to their engineering department. Sometimes they have clubs that are very focused on issues that might overlap with what we're doing. We could do a whole lot more in that regard if we made it a priority. The interesting problem with respect to this, I think, comes to the fact that we just don't take hiring very seriously. And let me illustrate the evidence for this. At least if you look at the private sector in the US, only about a quarter of the employers do what Travis just suggested, and that is they actually try to see whether their hiring practices produce better quality applicants. And if you're not doing that, by the way, you can't possibly defend yourself against discriminatory practices, because the only way you can show that you're not doing that is if you can show that your practices, not the ones you bought from somebody else, that your practices as you're executing them have no discriminatory effect, or effectively none, right? So what do we look at instead? Virtually all employers look at cost per hire and time to fill. And so what they're trying to do is they're minimizing time to fill, let's do it faster, and cost per hire, let's do it cheaper. And we're not looking to see, are we doing it better, right? So I think we could do all these things better. It's not that hard, it's not rocket science. It's about applying some attention, some energy, some resources, some executive time to it. And the same thing is true for a more diverse population of employees. We know how to do these things. We know how to recruit better. We just have to make it a priority, and we haven't done it.
Peter, you know, you're making some good points here about the myth around the skills shortage and changing how we look at the sources of talent. One of the things that one of the questions from the audience here plays right to that. How do you view recruiting from existing workforces for cyber roles? People who are already a known quantity, who've demonstrated the soft professional skills and understand the business, and then create a professional path that may start outside of cyber, come into cyber or IT, and then after some period of time transitions back into the rest of the business. So, you know, what do you see, Peter, going to you first, how do you see that as a source of talent?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it takes us back to something Deji had said earlier about their own internal processes for finding talent. You know, if you went back to when many of us began our careers, a typical corporation 30 years or so ago, for those of us who are older, typical corporation filled about 90% of its vacancies internally. Okay? At the moment in the US, typical corporations fill 35% of their vacancies internally. So we went from 90% to 35. And that means we're hiring laterally all the time for all kinds of positions. And we're filling 95% of our hiring is to backfill for vacancies caused by people who have left. So we could do way better at this simply by trying to keep people from leaving. And we do that in part by giving them opportunities internally. So let me tell you a quick story about this, something that IBM did a few years ago, where they had a group of consultants, IT consultants, and the technology they were working on was going to become obsolete. They thought pretty soon they were moving away from it. And the initial response was, let's lay these people off, we'll go hire new ones. And this is a story about the head of human resources there, Diane Gerson, who persuaded the CFO to let her see if they could retrain these people. And it goes back to the retraining model, financing model we talked about earlier. They said to them, look, if you want to leave, okay, you can leave. We'll help you exit the organization. If you want to stay, here's the deal. We'll provide training for you on Fridays to retrain you for these other jobs. We're going to pay you for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you want to get retrained for these new jobs, you're on your own dime on Friday. We'll provide the training, you provide the time. We're co-investing in this thing. And their calculation after this is they got a 2 times return on the investment they had made from this, exactly as you're saying, because they had people who knew the company already. They already knew consulting. They just didn't know this technology very well, right? So it makes perfect financial sense to do this, but the reason it does is you have to do the accounting right? The accounting is not simply, could we replace them with somebody outside? The accounting is how much do we actually lose when we have to go outside, hire somebody new, bring them in, pay them more, wait for them to get up to speed. We have people underneath who quit because they see there's no career path. You start totaling all that stuff up and you realize it's way cheaper to provide opportunities internally.
Yeah, no, that makes complete and total sense. The fit perspective in terms of culture fit can't be overstated. If you don't put hiring for cultural fit high on your list of criteria, you may bring people in who just don't gel with the organization, and that becomes an issue.
And one further point on that, they have security clearances.
Yep, absolutely. Deji, let me shift to you for another question that's come from the audience. As part of talent acquisition, would you put any effort or consideration into a software-based technical talent assessment? And you referred a little to that in your earlier comments. What do you think about this with regard to this question?
Yeah, we've had a whole sort of revisit. What are we doing? How are we doing it? Where can we apply technology to help with how we look for talent, right? And so that plugs in a number of different ways. And honestly, these days, there are a lot of AI tools that are out there that help overlay into our systems and helping make some decisions and identify some things that we haven't seen. So as we look at candidates, we've implemented scorecards or various assessments. We've done some coding screening or code review type stuff that will help in identifying some of the strengths that these folks bring to the table here. So I do think there's a place for it. I do think it helps with narrowing down and actually sort of trying to get to that unbiased view of what folks bring to the table. It is useful, and honestly, there is a place for it. And I think as we fine-tune our process, we see different tools that offer one thing or the other. So honestly, there is a place for something along those lines.
Yeah, and I mean, technology continues to change all the time. So we can't just say, okay, this is our system, and this is what we're going to do for 5 years. We have to keep looking at our system, looking at our process, and moving forward. Yep. Travis, I've got a question for you from the audience. Cybersecurity is an interdisciplinary team sport. And as you pointed out, our nation's industrial community is fragmented. We've got government, we've got industry, we've got technical silos. What's being done or what can be done to address these major systemic issues? And as you're trying to build a new approach to building a cybersecurity workforce, what are you doing in the federal government in this regard?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're doing is trying to look at the skill sets that are relevant broadly. So maybe that aren't just relevant to the Department of Homeland Security. I think what we sort of see is that many of the types of employees, the types of specializations that we're attempting to develop have relevance well beyond the department, right? And so going back to what I said earlier, maybe eliminating some of those boundaries between thinking about a federal workforce versus a private sector workforce and creating pathways by which people could support both of those sectors over the course of their career. I think as we begin to build, in the future potentially, a cybersecurity workforce in the nation that has a better understanding of what's happening in the public sector, what's happening in the private sector, I think at least in terms of understanding and relevance or, experience with particular technological challenges from those two different spaces will help to dissolve some of those boundaries that exist today. That's especially relevant at our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, where many of our employees work very closely with individuals from a variety of public sector entities on a daily basis.
Well, and building bridges is going to be increasingly critical. In fact, another bridge that we can look at, and I'd like to spend a little time looking at from all three panelists, is employer and academia. We have a question from the audience. Community colleges are a resource where we have cybersecurity pathways. The challenge has been employers' willingness to partner in a win-win scenario. Do you have any suggestions as to how to tighten the relationship and recognize our certificates, which align to industry certifications? Peter, I know you've written about this subject of industry and academic and employer connections in terms of how academia can play a part on this. Let me start with you and ask your perspective on what role should employers be looking to the academic community to play?
Well, I think the problem is employers don't trust the academic community, and they don't particularly trust the credentials. And, you know, this issue of trying to bring the two closer together has been on the agenda at least since the School to Work Opportunities Act in 1994, where there were explicit efforts to do it. I think one of the things that we know is this really high level collaboration just doesn't do much. You know, the industry association talking to the academic association just really doesn't help span the boundary. What spans the boundary is individual employers talking to individual schools about what the schools could produce that the employer would actually hire for, right? So where this really works well is when they are really in bed together, where they're willing to say, the employer will say, look, we'll send some people to your classes to show you what we're doing with this particular type of math or this particular technology. And we'll provide some opportunities for your folks to come shadow our employees for a while and see what they're doing. And we'll provide some opportunities for them to be interns because we want to hire them. What's held that up, frankly, is that employers don't want to make any kind of commitment that's very long. So if you see, for example, the co-op programs in the US, everybody thinks they're a terrific idea. There's still only 2 schools in the United States that really do it. That's Drexel and Northeastern. And why is that? Everybody thinks it's a good idea. The problem is trying to persuade the employers that they should stick with it and not just come in the year they want to hire, because these programs extend over multiple years. And I don't know if those programs are ever going to make much progress. I think the best we can do is local college, local school, local employer getting in bed together so close that they know exactly what's going on in this class. They know what the kids are learning. They know what they need when they get out. They can change it next year. That's, I think, about as good as we can do.
And Deji and Travis, I'm going to look to you for examples if you have them. Deji, are you doing anything at Akamai with regard to partnering with colleges, universities on any of your needs?
Yes, we are. And actually, just like Peter said, we actually take in co-ops from Northeastern. That's something that we've been fortunate in how we've gone through our operations. I think Akamai was founded as an MIT company, or MIT project. So there's a huge tie-in to the academic connection there. We also have a number of our employees who actually teach or moonlight outside the workforce. So there are some partnerships with a variety of schools, and obviously I think one of the best elements here is we've had some employees who actually get some of the stuff we do into the curriculum in some of these schools. So that's been a unique opportunity where we can actually mold and put forth the kind of content and areas that are interesting to us. Outside of that, you know, we do have a regular internship program that we run, which is a global program. And so the variety of schools that we talk to and engage with and trying to pull talent and get folks to intern with us over the summers and hopefully come back if they're not at the graduating timeframe, and then hopefully make some conversions and hires after they graduate. So it's been something that's been ongoing with the company for a long time.
And Travis, how about you from your perspective in DHS?
Yeah, so I would say the department has a variety of relationships with academic institutions. Many of them focus specifically on the cybersecurity mission space. One of the things that my team is focused on with the launch of the cyber talent management system is making sure that we can make those relationships a bit more real and tangible in terms of leading to hires for graduates from particular academic programs. Part of the problem that we faced historically is that we can engage, especially our cyber subject matter experts, with professors to talk about curriculum, to talk about the skills that are most important to the department at a particular period of time. But our hiring rules, our HR processes never matched those skills that we were articulating. So we're trying to create a line of sight between what we need for our mission, how we speak to academia, and then actually providing a pathway for people to leave school and to experience a career at DHS in cyber.
You know, it's interesting because, Peter, you raised a a bit of a controversial point. On the one hand, saying that industry doesn't trust academia, but then looking to, on a more localized basis, building those trusted relationships between employers and academic institutions on programs at work. And from my own experience, what I see working largely is if academia just insists on putting out what it thinks needs to be taught, then that may not match the needs of employers. But on the other hand, if academia can effectively build programs that meet the ongoing, changing, developing needs of employers, then it can be very fruitful partnership and a very trusted partnership, building really what the audience needs. I want to ask a question about what you're doing with regard to hiring. Travis, are you requiring college diplomas with regard to your cybersecurity workforce hires, or are you moving away from that requirement?
Yeah, so we're pivoting away from academic requirements, which are pretty common across government for certain occupations in terms of a way that people can sort of qualify for a job. What our research with psychologists shows is that for most of the cybersecurity roles that we have at the Department of Homeland Security, a degree is not required. In many cases, a professional certification isn't even required. What we're looking at in terms of reinvigorating and modernizing our hiring process is what can we ask people to do in terms of work samples, completion of particular tests to actually demonstrate the skills that they have related to our mission or the potential to perform that work after training. So we're moving away from that formal degree model.
Okay, Deji, what about you?
Similar thought on our side as well, too, as we try to sort of minimize that bias. It had always been something that was woven in. As I mentioned, the company founded from academia. We'd always had that as a requirement. And as we dug deeper and looking into what is really required for the positions and how people can learn and utilizing the tool that I mentioned earlier that helps with reducing the bias in our write-ups and our advertisements, we're stripping some of that away. There's some roles where the fundamentals are required, but there are others, and it gives a different look and opens up a whole host of new candidates and applicants that we can take a look at. So it's something that actually is, if you look at our positions these days, you see some of those that don't actually call for that, where in the past it was always a standard level of criteria that was required.
Sure. And Peter, is this a trend that you're seeing growing in industry?
No. Unfortunately, we've been talking about this for probably since the 1990s. So those of you who are older in this world may remember the National Skills Standards Board in the mid-1990s. The idea was to do exactly this. If we could all agree what skills are required, then we could break the hold of the academic credentials and we could just identify the skills that people need. You could test on it, and voila. But it went absolutely nowhere. And frankly, in those days, it went nowhere because the employers in industry couldn't agree on what they were looking for. So we never got these industry standards going in the first place. But it is exactly the right thing to do, what Travis and Deji are saying. If you think you got a skills problem, if we could look in different places than we're looking now, that is an incredibly smart thing to do. Because you can hire better people and you can hire them more cheaply, right? Which is kind of the goal here. But to do that, you have to be willing to do this one thing, and that is, let's actually look at our data and see if we can predict who is going to do well in these jobs. We have to have tests, but we then also have to map it onto our data. And the astonishing thing that we found talking to employers is how difficult they seem to find that to do. To just say, okay, let's look at our selection tests. What we do, is it predicting who's good or not? And by the way, when you're talking to vendors, that is what you have to press them on. Not the story about why what they're doing sounds cool, but the story of, can you show me the evidence that this actually predicts whether anybody is a good worker or not? And if they can't do that, just forget it. I mean, they got nothing. They're just selling sizzle, right? So we have to be able to do that. It's not rocket science, particularly for you folks. You know, in this world, it's not a complicated thing. It's a political thing, internally political. Can we get the guys who control the performance appraisal database to share their data with the people who control the applicant tracking software database? If you can do that, it's just a database management thing. to make that thing work. That's where we got to start. If we can get that far, we can find these alternative pools of people. We can crack this problem that we've been talking about for 40 years or so. It's just a lack of will.
Well, and data, a lack of will perhaps, and a lack of data as well.
Well, the data is there. The data is there now. It's database management. That's all. Data's there.
This is the challenge that I've run into in 3.5 decades of being in learning and development. It's easy for us to measure classroom-based performance and achievement against a set of learning objectives. But when we get to the classic level 3 and level 4 assessments of performance, in terms of is something being applied in the workplace, and then what's the impact on the job, we tend to lack the data or lack the ability to get to the data that would help us answer those questions. We are getting down to our last 10 minutes here, and we've got more questions than we can answer in the Q&A pod. So I want to actually ask one very focused applied question from Deji and Travis, and then we'll get to final remarks from each of our panelists. Deji and Travis, as we think about cybersecurity and we think about talent development, this is an ongoing need, not just the development of people to be able to contribute to the cybersecurity workforce, but also the continuing evolution of their technical skills and their professional skills, because this is far from a static field. Things are changing all the time. As you think about developing your cyber workforce on an ongoing basis, what percentage of time are you thinking you're actually going to have people learning and continuing to develop during the course of any given year, let's say? What percentage of time do you expect to be having people learning during that period of time? Deji, let's start with you.
Oh, that's a really great question. It's one that's it's an interesting one to think about. I think one of the things that we've incorporated into our company as well, these recently over the last few years, is we've actually brought in a mentoring program, right? So to really augment and guide and help the employees who are looking to branch out or pick up time on learning new things. So I think for those who are really interested in developing and furthering their careers, we encourage them to own their careers. We've given them guides, we've given them training, we've given them options to pick up things either on their spare time, or we've actually been talking about, I'm going to go quote unquote, say like an Akamai at night or something like that, where you allow people to learn offline and see if there are other projects or programs that they can tie into. So we have also tried to tap into the internal folks and also have them, if they're groups and projects and folks who have additional tasks that they don't have a headcount or budget for, to allow employees to learn and come as a side job, maybe learn something different outside of your regular space. So it's things that we've been tossing around. Some are actually in flight right now, but in terms of being able to quantify what's expected there, I honestly would say that that's a tough one, because we want people to be able to do your jobs as defined, but at the same time, if there's something that's extra that you're interested in pursuing and learning, give you the time and space. One of the good things that we have as a company is that unlimited vacation policy. So it allows people to take time to do things that they want to do. So work things out with your current leadership and be able to take time for yourself. I think in this day and age, it's an important thing. So a roundabout way of saying, I don't have a specific number to tell you, listen, it's 25% of your time. I know some established companies have actually come out and said that, where they give you, a week, a Friday, set time to go learn. We haven't defined that, but we encourage it and we welcome folks to have the conversation and utilize the tools that are available to augment their skill set.
Travis, how about you? You got a fix on a number, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I would say this is something that's really difficult to quantify. And the way that we sort of look at it is that there is some variation depending on what career level you're at. So if you're really starting your career versus if you're an expert that's supposed to be playing a mentorship role, the amount of training and development of new skills probably varies. One of the things that we think should be consistent, regardless of career level, is a commitment to continual learning, and really a little bit more than a paperwork commitment to what that learning looks like. And what I mean by that is we're trying to envision a partnership process by which employees sort of articulate the direction they'd like their career to take, which is especially important in the field of cybersecurity, where certain career paths, there's a lot of variability. So where you sort of start your technical journey and where you end depends a lot on what you're interested in and the work experiences you have. But that partnership also then means a commitment on behalf of the department in terms of monitoring that learning and helping to guide people to be exposed to the types of work that will allow them to enhance their skills, broaden their skill set, and then also, sort of deliver on that commitment that you've built together for what that career development will look like for that person. So we tend to, in the government, focus on individual development plans, creating documentation. We don't often check back to see whether that documentation has been made real.
Yeah, and it is that commitment, that focus, and that genuine intent. Okay, we're almost at the end, so I want to go to the classic lightning round. Quick answer, but pithy answers, please. If there was one thing that you could wave a wand and change today that would clear your path, make big progress in clearing your path toward developing your cybersecurity workforce, or in general, the cybersecurity workforce, what would that be? And Travis, since your mic is open and we were with you, let me start with you.
Yeah, I'm tempted to say something about making it easier to bend or alter government rules from a federal perspective. But I think if it were easier to build some of the relationships with the broader community of people who we think will be some of our applicants in the future, if there was just one button I could press to communicate with all of them, that would make our job a lot easier. Okay,
community building. Deji, how about you?
I think for us, and fortuitously based on this everybody working from home mindset, that's actually given us a little bit more reach. And it's one of the things that we're thinking about as what does the future of work look like for us? But it's allowed us to expand beyond the normal borders that we would be looking at. So I think that's one benefit of having the flexibility of everybody being on any part of the world. So I think that will continue to help us as we're able to tap into talent in different areas.
Okay, and Peter, how about you from the broader both industry and academic perspective?
Across all work, we know that people learn the most from developmental assignments, stretch assignments, work-based learning. So I think if we could get purposeful about that is giving opportunities for people to learn by doing, that is working on slightly different things than they've worked on before, which means having to get them out of their box a little more than they're in right now. That's the simplest thing to do. It's the most cost-effective thing to do.
So it's been interesting here. I mean, this has been a fascinating discussion. We could go on for a lot longer. We are at the end of our time, but what's fascinating about this discussion is that really the things that we are talking about are focusing on communication and community building and changing the way we think. We're not really talking about detailed technical solutions to technical challenges, although technical tools have a place. It's really about the basics of how do we approach the thought and the idea of learning in the contemporary world, in a fast-paced, quickly changing society. How do we move things forward quickly? I want to thank very much Peter Capelli, Travis Hoadley, and Deji Mabogunje for their contributions, for their expertise, and their transparency in this discussion. And Randy, I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was a fantastic session, and certainly that's the way to go out in terms